Good morning. So, Trisha, I see you're in the meeting room. There you are. Do you want to check if your microphone's working? I know your video is doing good. So on the screen in the bottom left is a little button that says, oh, you can't hear me? Do you have your speakers turned? Oh. Can you see the chat box? Chat? It's backwards. Well, I think everyone heard those chimes. I think that means it's 9 o'clock. So welcome and happy Friday. Hope everyone's had a good week, and thank you for joining us today. I think we've got a pretty full agenda, so I don't want to delay too much by waiting for folks to get on. I see the meeting is being recorded, so hopefully for those folks who come in late, or if people aren't able to join us live today, they can go in look this up on the staff resources page later to watch today's presentation. So I wanted to quickly go over a couple of organizational updates. First of all, I wanted to just thank everyone who participated with us at the Innovation Conference on the 19th. I think that was a really successful event, and definitely thanks to Michelle Walford for leading the planning committee and getting that whole thing pulled together. It was a huge undertaking, and I know she's on vacation this week, and she deserves to do so, certainly after that big event. I know other people have come to me afterwards and shown interest in some of the innovative ideas they saw, so I think that's wonderful. In this week's the Directors Weekly, I'm going to be providing some contact info for the people who were in the showcases, because I know at least one person in our office has asked for that because she wants to follow up with them and maybe didn't get all the contact information that day. And to look for that if anybody else is interested. And especially I want to say congratulations to the first place team, Sequoia's 4-H After School, the Maker Group. They had a great innovative idea, and we're looking forward to seeing that project and the other 4 teams that placed unroll their innovative ideas. So I just wanted to remind everybody that, we definitely support doing innovation here, and hope that everyone finds the time within their work schedule to embrace some of those new ideas and take some of those things to heart. I also wanted to just touch base on Extension Scholars. We did set the deadline earlier this week of November 1st for requesting an Extension Scholar for this summer, but if any of you were thinking about it and you hadn't yet done that, please go ahead and fill that out immediately so we can start advertising and getting students to apply for those positions. And then finally, I've put it in the Directors Weekly at least once now, but I wanted to let everyone know that the next First Friday will actually not be on the 1st of December. It will be on the second Friday in December, December 8th. And that's because I have a scheduling difficulty. So please make sure you mark your calendars for that. And Allison does a great job of sending reminders out and making sure everybody has the link. So we'll be reminding you as we get closer to. So with that, I want to welcome our speakers. So today our theme is on disaster response and education and outreach regarding that. Steve Kane, who is with Purdue University, he's going to tell us a little bit about EDEN, the Extension Disaster Education Network. So I met Steve when I was in Vermont at the National Extension Directors and Administrators meeting, and he gave a similar presentation there that he will be doing today. Good. And then, so after Steve tells us about EDEN, we also have Tricia Walkendorf, who is with the UD Disaster Research Center. So she's going to tell us a little bit about their group. And I would like everyone, while our speakers are sharing their information with us, I want you to think about what we do in Extension now and what kind of resources would be appropriate for Delawareans to be receiving from us regarding disaster preparedness and response. And I think it would be great if we could really have more of a web presence on this topic. We might have some things out there now, but it's not centralized or probably really easy to find if we had some sort of disaster come and strike us. So it would be great if we had all of this information organized in advance. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve. So Steve is with Purdue, and he's the Extension Disaster Communication Specialist and the Indiana point of contact for EDEN. So Steve, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I've been with the EDEN Network for its entirety, which we're getting close to 25 years old. And it's always good to talk to other extension staff at other states. So I'm going to go right into my presentation. And there it goes. Not sure why that's happening. You may be seeing a white screen right now, and my computer, there we go. Hold on. There we go. So EDEN, the Extension Disaster Education Network, is really about extension focused on disasters, and that's what we're talking about here today.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, go
I'm
ahead.
actually seeing your slides right now. I'm still seeing all of the boxes with the names or the faces.
Okay, hang on one second. I forgot to hit share screen.
There we go. I think it's coming now.
Thank
Perfect.
you. There we go. Can you see the full screen? Thank you. All right. EDEN started after the '93 floods of the Missouri and Mississippi River. And I remember in those days that it took us 3 days using an antique computer system to try to find resources from the different extension land-grant universities. And then we hard copied those and carried them out to the counties that were most affected by the floods. And what we found, the extension locally was not prepared to really deal with disasters. So the USDA gave us some funding. We created this network. And today, if we have a flood, anyone in your system can get on our national website and find hundreds of flood resources that can be used locally. And so what goes around comes around. Here we are in 2017, and we have some pretty massive effects on the nation through the hurricanes that we just recently had. You have Hurricane Harvey hit first, and then Hurricane Irma crossing across Florida, and then Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And in all three of those hurricanes, Extension is responding. You can see Texas A&M pick up there hauling stuff. 4-H'ers got involved by helping clean up a church, and that's just one example of how Extension got involved. A little more techie, we actually got involved with the National Guard to move feed to growers who needed feed. And you can see the Everglade type boat hauling hay out to cattle that were stranded by the flooding. Basically, what we're talking about is there are thousands of questions that people have, and we need the right answers right now. And that's what Eden does. In fact, right now on our network, someone is asking a question about flood insurance, and we have people helping answer that question so they can help their local constituents. So that's the really cool part about Eden, is we are a network, and I'll talk about that, supporting each other. We started expanding in 1997. At first, Eden was just a North Central region project, and in 97 we started to become national. In 2002, some of you may remember the old CSREES, which is now NEFA. We got a training grant and we started to expand. In 2005, all 50 states and 3 territories were involved. And Eden was an e-extension pioneer community of practice, and we're still very much involved with e-extension. Our mission is simple: reduce the impact of disasters through research-based education. And that's why the land grants are so important in this mission, because we do get the research-based education, and through extension, we reach that out to the consumers. In our mission, we present interdisciplinary and multi-state programs, and that's one of the reasons why the feds love us, is because we cross state lines. And flood information in Maryland can be just as good as flood information in Delaware, but the local educators sorting that out and using it is what's important. We very much link federal, state, and local agencies and organizations. As a network, we try to anticipate future disaster education needs and find ways to find that. The one we're working on right now is food and ag cybersecurity. Believe it or not, the Department of Transportation says that thefts of food and ag products are some of the biggest Department of Transportation issues for cybersecurity. And obviously, we want to provide timely communication information to meet the audience's needs. Our internal goals are to strengthen Extension's capacity. I hope I'm helping a little bit with that today. I think you're going to walk away with some resources that you'll be able to use in your state. And strengthen Eden's capacity to provide research-based disaster education. Our external goals are to enhance the abilities of individuals, families, organizations, agencies, and businesses to better prepare for and prevent and mitigate against disasters. In the old days, we kind of didn't say that we were in the response phase, and we focused more on the phases I have here. But today, American Red Cross calls on us, FEMA calls on us in the response phase. So at another point, we can talk a little bit more about how that expanded. We serve as a national source of research-based disaster education. We work in, as I just alluded to, we work in all disaster functions or phases. The institutional members are the 1862 and 1890 land grants. We also have sea grants, which are sometimes associated with the land grant, and sometimes they're separate. If you don't know sea grant, it's actually part of NOAA. It is to NOAA what the land grants are to NEFA, USDA. We have international members, and USDA, NEFA, and APHIS are our biggest partners. Eden is just a network. It's 300 plus dedicated volunteers, and if any folks from your institution join, you'll be part of that 300. We represent more than 75 different areas of expertise. So when you send an email out to the network asking a question, you've got a lot of potential people out there to help answer that. We have officers and standing committees and chairs, and we have liaisons from the 1890s and Sea Grants, also liaisons from USDA, NEFA, ECOP, NOAA, Sea Grant Extension. Floods are actually the #1 disaster in the United States. People think about tornadoes because they're scary and hurricanes, but hurricanes cause floods. And so a few years back, we developed our National Eden Issues Leadership Teams, and we have 2 of them, one on flood and one on drought. In 2012, 67% of the United States was under drought, and you may not realize it, but droughts, 2 droughts are the top 5 disasters cost-wise, and the drought of 1988 is the most deadly disaster in the United States. You don't think about it, but a lot of people died because of heat exhaustion and respiratory issues during that drought. We work in all 4 program areas. You guys know the program areas. But the key is, and this is a kind of a catchphrase, not just with Extension, but with everyone who does disasters. All disasters are local, and I could add here that all disasters are different. Each disaster has custom needs. That's why it's so perfect for Extension locally to work in the disaster area and bring research-based education. In that, we must prepare families. Extension staff should prepare their offices, and we have some good programs at the different institutions to share that. Ohio State stands out, University of Kentucky. And we must help prepare our communities. And one of our areas in which Extension is growing rapidly is in this is an acronym, but it's COAD, Community Organizations Active in Disaster. And we're finding there's a natural fit for Extension to work with local community leaders through COADs to increase the capacity of a local community to survive a disaster. Quite a while back, we took a survey of farmers and asked them, who would you turn to if you had a suspicious plant issue? And the #1 choice was Extension. I'm glad to know that we were the second choice in animal issues because veterinarians were first, and that's where it should be. And many of you know we work with veterinarians very closely on those kinds of issues. We also did a survey. This is quite old, but it really formed the foundation of what we did nationally to develop resources. We did a survey of Extension educators' rankings of Homeland Security educational needs, and drinking water was #1. The issue on that was the media really played with the drinking water issue at the time of the survey, so I think it kind of skewed the survey a little bit. Food security was second. The individual's role, you can read the rest of them there, and you can see that the ag ones maybe didn't score as much, but you got to think about the fact that this was all the educators were across all 4 program areas, so only maybe a third of the educators answering the survey were agriculture. Here's our brand new website. You can see the URL up above. Louisiana State University houses this website. And I'm really excited about this because we just put the new website up 2 weeks ago during the director's meeting in Vermont. And I want to go through that a little bit. And actually next Wednesday, there's going to be a webinar, and the folks that put this website together are going to walk through it a little bit more thoroughly. And Jen, I'll send you the information on that webinar. But if you go to the Educate button, you find our resource catalog. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about a web presence. Purdue Extension has an Eden website, and I got 80% of my resources from the national site going down to other states. North Dakota, for example, has phenomenal flood information. Actually, believe it or not, 26 land-grant universities have great drought information, and so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can come here and you can take a look at what the other extension states are doing. Under Explore, we have Eden Notes, and Eden Notes is used when we have a disaster within our state. You can go fill out an Eden Note, and sometimes you can actually get some help dealing with that disaster through the Eden Notes. But just as importantly, the folks at NEFA use that, and the Secretary of Agriculture is very much informed of some of the things that we're doing. There's Eden Projects, our annual meetings, which are extremely valuable. Every time I go to an Eden annual meeting, I come back with so many resources. And it's great to be involved in a group like this. And then the Engage tells you a little bit more about how Eden works and what the leadership is in the committees and that kind of thing. I used the directory, the state directory, probably as much. Well, this is just the network directory, and then to the right of that is the state information. I use those two quite a bit to contact other people in the system. One of the biggest investments that we made nationally with Eden was putting together strengthening community agro-security preparedness. And it has been used in 27 states, helping make communities where 20 million people live better prepared for agriculture and agro-security issues. And our biggest pot of funding is the NEFA Food and Ag Defense Initiative, so that's why there's a big emphasis on agro-security. But some other classes, and these course trainings, not classes, these are trainings that we developed, came from that survey that we did in 2003, and we've developed these over the last 10 years. Our plant biosecurity course is getting used worldwide. Family preparedness, ready business. You can see that relates back to that one slide. And of course, when the pandemic came out, we figured it was important to have something to help people understand how to be prepared for a pandemic. Eden has a big presence on social media. We use it and we get a lot of comments. We have a lot of collaborations. In fact, in the drought of 2012, Eden was asked to lead a national drought task force put together by FEMA and the voluntary organizations active in disaster. And we had more than 20 organizations work with Extension to develop a capacity building program for drought. But you can see some of our biggest partners here on this slide. As I mentioned, NEFA, the Food Ag Defense Initiative Fund, we get about $350,000 a year that has been coming to Purdue for the last 15 years. I am retiring, and they've decided that they're going to make it competitive, so any institution can be a part of that. And by being part of Eden, you'll know that when this information comes out. I think it's going to be May or June of next year. Of course, each member institution contributes through FTEs, and we estimated that in 2002 at 2 million. That is an old number, but we looked at that again about 2010, and it came out about the same. And then there's a thing called special needs grants, and those are from NEFA. I should have put that in the front there, but the special needs grants range from, I've seen them as small as 10,000 and up to 160,000, and any institution can apply for those. Those are annual. I believe about $400,000 a year is awarded through these special needs grants. The one thing that everyone complains about, we put it all on the table here, is the special needs grant has a matching stipulation, and so however much money you ask for, you have to come up with a match on that. Our national staff is 1.5 FTEs at Purdue. Half of that 0.5 is me. And then Abby Hostetler is our national Eden communications coordinator, and she represents the one. And then we fund folks at LSU to run our national website. Through those funds that we've received from NEFA, as many as 23 institutions have received FATI funds, NEFA, Purdue, and then to the subcontracting university. And those funds have ranged from as little as paying someone to go to a national meeting to represent Eden, to as much as, I think, University of Kentucky that developed the SCAP course we were looking at about $230,000 over 3 years. But Eden is really only as strong as the delegates contribute to make it. And so a lot of those 300 people are working on committees and contributing to make Eden what it is nationally. One of those is the Eden Exercise Committee, developing ongoing exercises for FEMA's Emergency Management Institute. The EMI came to us, that's what they're called, and it's actually located in Maryland, came to us and said they did not have enough training and exercises on agricultural issues. And so we had a committee develop that. It got an outstanding response. EMI said they've never had to expand a course 4 times before, but they got a great response from local emergency managers and first responders on that. Last year, Eden was part of a White House roundtable on preparedness. That was in the former administration, and we just don't know where that's going to go. I've been told they're going to keep on doing this, that the president is supposed to do a preparedness paper every year, and we're hoping they'll continue it, but we haven't heard anything on that yet. And last year at Cornell, we had the first incorporation of research and extension at the Eden annual meeting, and we hope to expand that. Looking to the future, in 2016 survey of Eden points of contacts, 18 states responded, and 78% of those folks say that extension should be part of either volunteer or donations management. We've been part of both here in Indiana through Purdue, and in the tornado 2012, we helped bring $12 million to that recovery. That compares to FEMA only bringing, I don't mean this in a bad way, but FEMA only brought in $2 million, $2.3 million to the $12 million that extension was part of. You got to know that goes a long ways with county commissioners and state officials when they see what we can do there. I'm going to go through this. This is a wish list, but just to give you some ideas of some things that we're looking at. We would like to have an executive director someday. There has been talk about extension regionalizing and connecting with the climate hub development. We no longer have the money for strengthening community agro-security preparedness, but that course has been approved by DHS, and people can get funding locally to develop that here. And again, I can't say enough good about that, but we do need some more money there. We're working with the 1890s. Right now, we fund $30,000 a year to work with the 1890s to help develop education that they specifically can help us with. We'd love to have an Eden strike team. A lot of our folks in the agro-security area want a large animal disaster response, train the trainer. Eden course maintenance, exercise development, and delivery. Resilience it's just one word here, but it's so important because, FEMA's heard me say this, FEMA is no longer in the disaster business, they're in the catastrophic business. And so more and more communities are going to find that they're not going to get FEMA assistance. And so we need to build resilience at the local level, or build capacity for disasters at the local level. And we'd like to put some funds into professional development. We want to seek more strategic partnerships like the one we have with Emergency Management Institute. And our dream is that someday we will have some money to help folks attend the Eden annual meetings through scholarships, because that Eden annual meeting is so important. This presentation was developed by Nick Place and myself and presented to the extension directors. You have my contact information there, and I'm going to leave that up for just a little bit. I am very open to discuss with anyone about Eden and how it works, and having been the point of contact in Indiana for 20 plus years, we've used Eden a lot, and I'll be glad to talk with anyone about that one-on-one or by group email.
Great, thank you, Steve. So I was just going to point out, I got reminded by that last slide there with Nick's name. I had advertised earlier that Nick would be joining us via a video. Unfortunately, that wasn't able to get worked out, so we aren't going to be featuring that today. But do folks have questions for Steve? Anything that they want to, unmic yourself or type into the chat box? I do have that open if anybody wants to ask a question. And while we're waiting for a moment, I will say that I did go onto the Eden website and I looked at the points of contact, and for University of Delaware, Mike Love's name is up there. And so as folks know, he is no longer with us with our extension program. So that right there, I think, is something that we should try to address. I'm not going to look for anyone to volunteer themselves right this second, but I would like to see that we get somebody on there as the University of Delaware contact. So if anybody's interested in that or thinks that they would be willing to serve that role, please let us know now or reach out to me later. And if not, maybe we'll come and start soliciting for someone to try to do that for us. So I had a question, Steve, if nobody else is going to pose one. So you mentioned the $12 million that you raised for the tornado response. How did you go about doing that? Were you working with partners, or Extension was really the one who sort of running a funding campaign?
That's a very good question. And it's complicated, but the money actually came flying in from everywhere. And two things that happened that particular tornado got a lot of national attention because the school bus went across the road and slammed into a restaurant, and a school was affected. And so money started pouring in. And what happens when money starts pouring in, if the community isn't prepared to handle it, if they don't have a 501c3 fiscal agent set up, that money disperses all over the place, and then you have trouble getting it back together. And so what we did, what I did was I oversaw the donations management of that. And when I say oversaw, I stood in the Emergency Operations Center 15 hours a day for weeks. And I worked with the United Way, and I worked with Salvation Army, and I worked with the local churches to identify who got money. And then we turned that back around, and in the recovery process, we made sure the money got to homeowners whose houses were destroyed. Mm-hmm. So I didn't do the work, but I oversaw the people doing the work. And I do have to joke about that because that was in 2012, and in 2011, I took the FEMA Volunteer and Donations Management course. And I went into the Emergency Operations Center on the first day of after the tornado, and they were doing everything wrong. Donations were being piled up on I-65 exit, and the National Guard was trying to manage that because people just get in their cars and they come and they want to donate stuff. And I said, well, you might want to do this, you might want to do this. Well, the second day after the tornado, they put me in charge of all that. And I said, I've never done this before, but I took a FEMA class, so maybe we'll get through this. And we did some things right and we did some things wrong, but we did raise over $12 million. Everyone together with Extension involved raised $12 million for that. So actually, we're at the opposite end of that right now. We had a tornado in Kokomo last year, and we only raised, I think, about $1 million, and the need was closer to $4 million. What is happening is that because of the hurricanes, resources are going to the coastal states. I'll give you a better example. South Bend had 1,000 people flood in 2006. 1,000 people's homes were flooded in South Bend in 2016. A week later, 30,000 homes were flooded in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. All the volunteers and all the money went to Louisiana. Good for them, but we struggled because we needed about $4.7 million, and I think we came up with $2 million. So we have some people that haven't recovered in South Bend because the money's just not there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you. I had one other question quickly. So the online courses, when you were showing that slide, I was starting to wonder, were those courses that are designed for extension, but then I saw some of them that were for like, um, local community leaders and things like that. So do each of those courses sort of have an intended audience, or are they, how does that work?
Yeah. The intended audience on all of them are local educators. So let's say the Ready Business. Any extension educator could take the Ready Business course and then turn around and help businesses become better prepared for disasters. The same with the pandemic. Now, Eden's audience has always been extension educators and extension specialists, but guess what? People find the resources and they use them. In fact, some of our, I'm slipping the name on it, but some of our smaller colleges actually use those trainings and teach those as courses at their universities. So community colleges is what I was trying to think of. And so the audience really still is extension educators, but a lot of people use our resources.
Okay. Now I see Susan Gary has typed a couple comments and questions in there. She had pointed out that the duty of being associated with Eden was always associated with our safety position, and I had mentioned that person, Mike Love, left, and we've not refilled that position. So that's just kind of got disappeared. So so that is an issue, and
it's a big issue.
Part of someone's job now, so someone else would have to take that on. And then she went on to say, so is FEMA requiring extension folks to be certified in ISC/NIMS in order to respond in a disaster? It was my understanding from state officials that this is required. Our Department of Agriculture made sure years ago under one of our previous secretaries that she was able to receive her certification. And then she thinks she's probably the only person on our staff at this point.
Right. I would like to address that a little bit in that, yes, in our guidelines, we say that extension educators should take at least ICS 100 and NIMS 700. You can do them in about 3 hours online. They're free and become certified. But I also want to say that before I was certified, I could go into the Emergency Operations Center as an expert, and the emergency managers in the Emergency Operations Center want expertise. And so some people say, well, they won't let you in if you don't have ICS 100 and 700. Well, that may be the case, and I disagree with the person that does that, because if I'm having an agricultural disaster, I want an ag expert in there. If we're talking to kids about terrorism, I want someone from family and consumer science expert talking to children. And so expertise is number one. The ICS and NIMS are number 2 and 3 in that list.
Okay, good to know. So that's all new to me. So I didn't know about that. But that's something I can look that up and share the links to those courses with all of our staff, and certainly people can we can have a further discussion about whether or not that's something we push for or encourage. And then Nancy Gregory also wrote, does the Eden disaster training work with the FEM incident command system training? She had that a few years ago and is wondering how similar they are. She had the ISC 1 and 2, 100 and 200.
All of our, SCAP incorporates the ICS information into it. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to answer that question real well today because I'm not familiar with the exact course that you took, but we work alongside with those groups, so I think they would work well together.
Okay. So I'm not seeing anything. Oh, yes. So Susan's saying there's a listserv, Serve Delaware, that we can register to be part of, that generates who has expertise to respond in state emergencies.
Right.
And she's connected to it via the Delaware Animal Response Group.
Yep. Oh, and I don't know why this is a bit of a tangent, but that reminds me, in terms of what happens if you become an Eden delegate, you will be on the listserv, and I probably from the listserv get maybe 20 emails a month. And some of those come from APHIS notifying us of stuff, but most of them are generated within our own group, people asking questions. I've got this disaster, how do I handle it? And so being an Eden delegate, that's about all it entails, is you get put on the Eden listserv, and it becomes a resource for you. We do like to have a Eden point of contact, and we're discussing this right now in terms of membership. The institution, the land grant or the extension system, is the member, and then each member institution has delegates. And at the moment, our policy is that the point of contact determines who in your state becomes a delegate. We're trying to rework that and let anyone that wants to be a delegate become a delegate. So, and then we do ask that someone attends the Eden National Meeting from your institution each year and bring that information back to your institution.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. I'm glad you shared that. Great. So what I'd probably like to ask folks to do is take some time, go on to the Eden website, look at those resources that Steve said are there. He said we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So let's see what's on there and what is appropriate for Delaware, and then maybe we can try to link to that on our web pages like he has with Purdue. And then I'll probably follow up with some program leaders and ask them to make sure those conversations are happening in each of the program areas to see what's appropriate for Delaware. So thank you, Steve. Good luck with your retirement. When are you actually retiring?
July.
Okay, so good luck. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm going to turn it over to Tricia Walkendorf, who is with our Disaster Research Center. It's a world-renowned institute, and she's also a professor of sociology. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Great.
So thanks so much, and thank you for having me here. And I'm mindful of the time that you have the group until 10 o'clock. Is that right? So I'm going to just talk briefly and let you know that if you have any questions, again, because I am in Delaware and we're just right here in Newark, that I'm happy to serve as a resource and talk for more, because I could probably chat for about 2 hours on ways that we could connect and collaborate. And I want to leave some time for questions as well. So as Jen mentioned, the Disaster Research Center is here at the University of Delaware. We are the oldest center in the world focused on the social science and management aspects of disasters. We've been around since 1963, studying from a very early stage events like the 1964 earthquake, crowds, riots, 3 Mile Island, 9/11, earthquakes, tsunamis, what have you. And our mission is really threefold. First of all, to advance our scientific understanding of disasters and really build into that body of research that Steve was mentioning that helps inform good practice and policy making. We are also focused on disaster education. We have some wonderful programs here at the University of Delaware. Undergraduate programs, for example, with a concentration in emergency and environmental management, that we're always looking for opportunities for those students to engage in internships and practicums. We have some fabulous graduate programs, both master's and PhD, in sociology focused on disaster and the environment, in public policy, civil engineering, and in the past, I guess it's around 6 years or so, a new interdisciplinary program focused on disaster science and management, really cutting across the various courses and offerings available on campus as students are interested in looking at disaster issues in a more holistic way. And we also engage very much in public outreach. So not only publishing in academic journals, but also speaking with Medical Reserve Corps, American Red Cross, FEMA and state agencies, private sector, any way that we can really engage and make sure that the findings that we're gleaning from our studies are helpful and useful in local, state, and communities and for policymakers nationwide and internationally. I'm going to touch very briefly on a couple of aspects that might be of interest, and would feel free to talk a bit more about it. One thing that I think might be interesting in dovetailing, one of our library resource coordinator, Pat Young, who takes care of our massive collection of material. We have over 70,000 items focused on disaster, emergency preparedness, and management here at the center. And that can be a great resource for extension as well as you're developing and thinking about what you want to do. So she works very closely and partially heads up the network of the Delaware Disaster Assistance Team. This is a group of individuals working on libraries, archives, museums, both in terms of thinking of maintaining those collections, preservation during a disaster, but also thinking about some of the unique roles that libraries and museums can play in the overall disaster response. If we think about very local communities, you might not have a lot of community support functions, but if you're lucky enough to have a great public library, that can be a wonderful space, in addition to thinking about some of the resources through schools and health clinics as well, or community centers. So that, I think, is a potential to kind of connect with what's going on with Delaware and Extension. We've done a good deal of work looking at pets and disasters, not so much looking at livestock and broader agricultural production. My parents were hog farmers, so I'm very familiar with that from a personal sense growing up. But thinking about some of those challenges with sheltering, people delaying evacuation, a good body of knowledge focused on that in the disaster community on pets. And I think much more can be done thinking about those impacts and the challenges logistically for non-pet animals that people are responsible for. And the impact that has, not only financially, if there is, if that is a loss to the individual, but thinking about the real stress and challenges with recovery. One of the things that we know very clearly from our work on disasters is the challenge in that recovery process. And Jen and I were talking about that a little bit as well, that if you don't lose somebody, if there isn't a loss of life in the family or a severe injury as a result of a disaster, that recovery phase can actually be more stressful to the household than the actual disaster event itself. Thinking about how long it takes to engage in that recovery process, the paperwork, the confusion through the various systems, the stops and restarts that can really take years, and the fact that it's not just you but others in your close social network are going through the same thing and can't necessarily provide the same support that they might, let's say, if you had a house fire. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity with Extension to engage in households on that front. Donation management, a lot of our work has looked at humanitarian relief and assistance, the challenge of spontaneous donations that can be extremely burdensome on a community that they don't expect it, asking people to send everything that they can and then realizing the gigantic burden that placed on especially smaller communities, but even large cities in contending with that. I think that there's some guidance that can be provided in that early aftermath as people are looking for help, but not realizing that some of that help can be less helpful in the long run. Thinking about the latent network that are in those communities, a lot of times people think about the cavalry coming in, or FEMA, conflating FEMA with all the other host of federal or even state agencies, lumping it all under the FEMA umbrella. But we know that there's tremendous capacity, even in more marginalized and vulnerable communities. I'm thinking of our work after 9/11, looking at the boat evacuation of Lower Manhattan and the 500,000 people that were evacuated spontaneously by the boat operators there. And then presentation that I gave in Calgary back in May, and them talking about how that reminded them of the Calgary floods, where farmers were bringing in their tractors and their large vehicles to help get people out of harm's way. And we saw that with Hurricane Harvey. We saw that with Hurricane Matthew in North Carolina. So some of those resources that we don't think of being part of that emergency response network, and really being essential, and how to integrate that and how to value it, and tie them into that communication network. The marginalized community aspect is key. So as we have people who are marginalized and disenfranchised in their community routinely, that's not going to get any better after a disaster situation. And I smiled a little bit, Steve, when you had the one picture of the preparedness with families, and that picture of the family packing their go bag. And I use that in my class as well on social vulnerability. There was some work done after Hurricane Katrina, looking at how expensive at that point in time it was for a family to put together a go bag, and some really great researchers, John Sorensen and Barbara Vogt, went to Home Depot, and they started packing the list, and it was something like $350 or $300 to get all of that together. Certainly going to be more today. And expecting some of those communities to have that on hand and just have your go bag sitting there that may not be used when you have a difficult time getting food on the table and back in the fridge and turning the lights on. Really some of the challenges that community face. We've done some wonderful work looking at this aspect of resilience or community functioning before a disaster. We have been working with Johns Hopkins, for example, on developing a community wellness and functioning index, where you can really look at the baseline measures that are in a community before a disaster strikes, tempering that with some of the social capital, the networks that people can draw upon, the resources that are pushed into a community, and really an interesting way to predict a community's ability to function and recover after a disaster, looking at that recovery trajectory. So that's a project that we're looking at in more detail right now, actually, with Chester County right over the border, trying to get some additional information on some data that points that we can't get using county data or sort of consistent data nationwide, but really to kind of get into the nuances of a community, some of the self-assessment rubrics that community is really excited about using to determine their own capacities and vulnerabilities. So just another way that we're trying to bridge those advances of science and think about ways that we can make actually a difference for those communities that are grappling with their preparedness and recovery planning. So I'm going to leave it at that because we're at 9:50, and give a little bit of time for questions. But again, I'm excited about this possibility of connecting.
Thank you. So I see Karen had put in the chat box that she worked with Pat Young to find some presenters for a youth and adult partnership that's happening next week. So it sounds like some folks know her already. So that's excellent to hear. Are there any other questions that people want to ask out loud or put into the chat box for Tricia? And I'll just share, I know you have the student network, because we originally met at the summer symposium where our extension scholars presented. So she came to see my student give her presentation. And so that was the first time we touched base. And then all of this sort of was happening with the hurricanes, and I was hearing about Eden. And then on my Facebook feed, I see that Mark Zuckerberg was meeting with people from Delaware, and it was Tricia who was part of that. So kind of brought it all back together, because I didn't know before the summer that we had this center here.
We're a well-kept secret within the state, and especially on campus. So
that's sort of like extension here. We're trying to break out of that, being this best kept secret type of thing.
But I should add too, with that student network, we do have a graduate a student group that's in a student chapter of the International Association of Emergency Managers. So they are very engaged, looking for opportunities. They're at Community Day in Newark. They have partnered with some of the Red Cross efforts in going to houses on Martin Luther King Jr. Day and looking at fire alarms and installation. So there might be really a chance to network some of their skills in emergency and disaster preparedness and management with some of the expertise with extension students who might have very localized but great bodies of knowledge that those students don't have, to partner them together and really connect that. And a lot of our students have permeated their way around the state, both in terms of health and human services here in the state. A number of people over at DEMA. One of our current students, Mae Johnson, is really a leader with the Citizen Corps. So in many of those organizations, having a DRC connection.
Well, I saw Dr. Rogers. She was on camera and then off, but she had put into the chat box asking if there were any students who might want to work with Extension to help pull together some of that information on disaster preparedness and response for our website. So maybe, you know, we need to write up another Extension Scholar request. And, you know, I was already planning on sharing our postings with you to get to your student network, but maybe we can have something specifically that would be perfect for someone that's already in your group.
Yeah, and they're always looking for you know, sort of semester projects to be focused on. Mm-hmm. So that could be a good, real, you know, focal point for them moving into, let's say, the spring semester. That's something that they want to tackle.
Great. So Karen, I saw you come on camera for a minute. Was there anything else that you wanted to add or say?
Trying to get off camera here. So I want to thank both Steve and Tricia, because I think this is a really important topic, and you, Jen, for reaching out. I know a couple years ago, we attended a presentation by Dr. Rob Gillio at the Youth and Adult Partnership, and he had done a lot of disaster help during Katrina and 9/11. And one of the things that he said was, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So I do feel it's really important for us all to be thinking about disaster preparedness. And a couple weeks ago, I was at the NAE48 or NAEFCS conference, and there was a group of folks from Eden there manning a table. And they shared with me at that time that Delaware didn't have a representative. And I think it is very important for us to link in and be part of that conversation, both locally here at UD and nationally through Extension. So thank you for putting this presentation together for us, because it really is important.
Thank you. And I'll give credit to Emily. She was the one who suggested it. So Susan has put another question into the chat box. She said, how are we sure that we aren't duplicating effort and information that already isn't out there in Delaware? We're a small state, but it seems like there are a lot of people and organizations with pieces and parts of this disaster response already. But in her experience, and I would tend to agree, we're probably not talking to each other. So I don't know, Tricia, do you know, is there sort of a network already that maybe we in Extension haven't been looped into, or is there not a lot of coordination? What about like our DEMA, or, you know, do you work with them?
We work with them quite closely, and more so, I would say, over the past year and a half, as our you know, current students have or our previous students have taken position there. The change with AJ Shaw coming in as director has really reinvigorated some of their outreach efforts, I think, overall in the state, and certainly with us here at the center. So one of the things that we've been talking with them about this year is to do just exactly that, to try to think of ways to pull some of those organizations together in a new way that both advertises some of the capacities that we have here at DRC. But I will say too that there's things that we do here really well that we could certainly benefit from working with Extension, that outreach. We know how to do it in a particular way, but that's not always the best way in terms of reaching individual households or different stakeholders in the community. So I think that there's an opportunity not to just duplicate efforts, but think about what are the strengths that we have. If we want to have this information shared, what form does that take? Pulling in from the guidance that Eden and Steve have already mentioned, that there might be formats for that really work, that are tried and true, and to think about how to complement each other, right? Than having those separate efforts. So we would be really, looking forward to that. And I think in our conversation with DEMA and Josh Kelly in particular, who's my former student, he might be able to structure that in a way and pull in a few other organizations too.
Good. Well, I definitely think we need to be following up and continuing this conversation. And I thank both of you. Are there any other final comments or questions for our presenters? Because we are nearing the end of the hour. Last call. not seeing anything show up. So I want to thank you both again for taking time out of your busy schedules for joining us, and thank everybody for participating today. And I'll be sure in next week's Directors Weekly to include some follow-up information on all of this. I think it's really good. So I don't think this will be the last time you'll hear about us talking about disaster response. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a great Friday and a great weekend.
Thanks so much.
Bye.